how to use story to sell on social media without selling, without feeling icky and pushy in the content that you are putting out there. So if we haven't met before, hi, my name is Jen Casey. I am a business strategy coach, and I work with online coaches and entrepreneurs who want to turn their social media into sales. When I first came into the online space, I remember struggling so much with creating content that people were actually engaging with. And I had all of these other coaches and influencers that I was following, and I never saw them selling. I never saw them talking about their products. I never saw them talking about their programs. And if they did talk about it, it was very subtle. It was a very soft sell. It was just like, bloop, like a little suggestion. And I couldn't figure out what was so different about their content because nobody could take their stuff and copy and paste it because it was so unique to them, their brand, and their message. And what I realized was they were incredible storytellers. So that truly is the secret sauce for the people who you're looking at who are going, how are they doing this? How are they so successful? Why is everyone watching their live videos? Why are people tuning into their Instagram stories? It's because they know how to tell story. That's it. It's so simple, right? And I think one thing that I hear from a lot of people is like, well, I don't have stories. Yes, you do. We are players on the stage, as Shakespeare said, so we are experiencing and creating stories every moment of every day. What I hope that you get out of this 5-day experience is that you start looking at every moment of your life saying, okay, how can I frame this, right? And this is something that you start to do over time. I go through each day and I'm like, can there be a story from something that I experienced? Is there a lesson that I want to share? And how can I package that and deliver it to empower my audience? Number one, when you start using story in your content, you become more memorable. You probably know, if you think about all the top influencers, all the top coaches that you follow, network marketing, otherwise, you probably know their story. You're probably like, oh my gosh, yes. Well, did you know that she was completely bankrupt and her brother's cousin's friend like stole all her money and then her sibling had cancer and then this happened? And like, you know their story because they tell it consistently, they tweak it a little bit every time, and you start to root for them even though they're super successful. You're like, you're not hating on them, you're rooting for them because you know what they've been through to get to where they are. Story makes you memorable. And when you deliver your message using story as the vehicle, it actually increases brain activity. So if you're just delivering something to somebody, like we see a lot of memes that say, no excuses, show up every day, or, some law of attraction quotes, like we see all this stuff all day long. And it's nice, but it doesn't really evoke that much unless it's something that's really resonant to what's happening to us in that moment. Most of it we just scroll past. But when it's something that is a story where we can, pictures start popping up in our head, we start smelling and tasting and experiencing what that story is what's happening in that story, just like a movie. We start playing out that movie in our brains, and all of a sudden, they've done so many studies where your brain actually starts to light up in all of these different areas. So it increases brain activity, which ultimately is going to intensify the emotional connection between you and the person reading it. And it also increases recall. I don't know if you guys follow Jim Quick, but I know a friend of mine went to one of his events and he had everybody get up, a group of people get up on stage, and they shared a little bit of they introduced themselves, said, hi, my name's Jen, this is what I do, and then they shared a little bit of their story. And he didn't give any explanation of what exactly this exercise was, so people weren't knowing what they were getting into. And then after that, they all sat down and he said, okay, a couple hours later, brought everybody back up on stage and said, what's this person's name? People didn't remember. They couldn't remember the person's name. But he said, can you tell me something about them? And they remembered the person's entire story. Okay, so that right there is such a powerful example of how story is going to create that really intimate connection, because that's what people are going to remember, because that's what's triggering your brain to encode. Like when I was in high school, I was in an AP psychology class, and I remember going up to my teacher and I was like, I don't understand, like we're learning the map of the brain and I'm like, the hypothalamus is here and the frontal cortex is here. I'm like, I can't, this is too confusing for me. This is like geography, but now you're asking me to do it in the brain. Why? I'm staring at this for hours. Why is it not going in? Why can't I remember it? And he said, you're not encoding it. And I was like, oh, because I wasn't attaching any kind of emotional connection to what I was looking at. And so that's really why story is so important. And I remember when I first became a business coach, I had started going to some Toastmasters meeting. I only went to 2. This is not something that I did ongoing, but I went to Toastmasters, and I, at the time, was not comfortable just getting up in front of people and talking. I was like, I'm good when I'm planned, but I'm not a good improviser. Obviously now doing so many live videos, I don't feel that way anymore, thankfully. But I was physically shaking because I was so nervous to get up and speak. And it was one of these things in Toastmasters, if you've ever been, where at the very end of the meeting, if you're a guest or if you're a member, they give you random prompts. And you have to get up in front of everybody and you have 2 minutes to give a response. So I'm like, Jen, you gotta do this. You gotta pump yourself up. You gotta be uncomfortable. Get uncomfortable. So the question was, what is the best piece of advice you've ever gotten? And so I got up and I shared a little bit of a story. And then another day, actually, this was really where it was kind of shocking. So anyway, so that first day I go up and I share the best piece of advice I've ever gotten. Most people were just saying like, this is the best piece of advice and here's why. I got up and I didn't start with the advice. I said, I shared my entrepreneur story and I said, and the best piece of advice that I had ever gotten was stop taking advice from unhappy, unsuccessful people who don't have like successful businesses. And then I sat down and I won. I was like the newbie and I won this little certificate for being like the best 2-minute response. Everybody votes. So I went back the next week and they asked another question. They said, okay, the question is, if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be and why? Like, what kind of animal would I be? And then I thought of something. And I was like, so I got up and I said, one time I was at my job at TGI Fridays and we were really bored. There was no tables. And we started going around in a circle saying what animal everybody would be. And my best friend Kate looked at me and said, if you were an animal, you would be a war horse. And I was like, what? She's like, you're like regal, you've got a jawline, you'd be a war horse. Okay. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But then I realized that it does, because when I was a little kid on Easter, me and my brother, we would be ready to go and egg hunt. And my mom would say, okay, are you guys ready? Get set, go. And we'd race into the living room, and I was a war horse. I was like, divide and conquer. I'm gonna get all these eggs, and I'd be piling them into my bag. And my brother's standing off to the side like, where would an Easter bunny hide an egg? And my mom's like, Peter, come on, get some eggs. And then they're telling me to put some back, right? So I told this whole story, and then I'm like, and that's why I think that I would be a war horse. So after that, I win for the second week in a row. And people are sitting there going, damn, you're good. How did you do that? How did you create something that was so captivating? But the cool part was I had created and written out all of these stories because of my business, because of social media. So these were different things that I had thought about and previously written and maybe even shared in trainings. So I had them in my back pocket ready to go. So I'm excited for you guys to have some of these stories as well. And the coolest part was about 2 weeks later, I was working with a client at Starbucks, and I don't do in-person training anymore like that, but I was working with one of my business coaching clients, and this random dude comes up to us and he's like, hey, I saw you speak the other day. Now, I thought he was talking about her because she speaks all over the place. And I was like, oh, you're talking to me? And he's like, yeah, like you told that story, like you and your brother. And he remembered my entire egg hunt story. And I was like, oh my God. And the coolest part was we were literally sitting there helping her map out her stories. So that was like a story inside a story inside a story inside a story, like story matrix, right? But the power of that and the point of that is to really realize, like, when you tell story, people remember it and they create more connection with you, which is number 2. So number 1 was when you share story, you become memorable. You are activating different parts of people's brains to help them with that recall. So you want to be sharing story in everything, Okay, number 2, you create connection when you share a story. So even just now, as I was sharing that egg hunt story, obviously I didn't share it in full with all the details and the bells and whistles, but maybe you were thinking about yesterday. Yesterday was Easter in the moment that I'm recording this. And so maybe you were thinking about something that happened to you as a kid on Easter. Maybe you were thinking about your kids right now, how they played and how maybe one kid is more competitive than the other with egg hunts, right? So you start now thinking about your situation. So now I've actually entered into your life in a way, right? And created that similarity, that rapport, because we've had similar Easter experiences. And it's like, oh, she gets me. We're kind of the same, right? And I think on social media, a lot of people aren't doing things like this. They're just not. And I know for even those of you in network marketing, you are sharing story, but what I often see, because I have a lot of network marketers who follow me, is they're good at sharing some stories, but they're only sharing their story into the business or their weight loss story or whatever their story is with the product. So we want to expand your stories and give you some other ones that you can polish up and use just like that. Because you create connection when you share a story. You create that connection. And one of my previous students, Nicole, she was working with some women. She's a dietitian, and she was working with women who were really like moms who needed to get themselves back, who were kind of getting lost in being a mom. And she was sharing with me, that she had this story, she was using it, and it wasn't really working. And she was like, telling women, like, I used to be anxious, like, I used to try to be super mom, but now I'm not anymore, and like, everything's great. And I was like, well, you do seem perfect. Like, you create these beautiful meals, like, you're totally fit, like, your kids eat broccoli. So from an outsider perspective, I'm not seeing the anxiety. I'm not seeing the transformation, because that's really what you're selling, right? Little nugget right there. You're selling transformation. So if I'm not seeing your transformation, and I'm like, I don't know if I totally buy it. Were you really anxious? Were you really going through all these struggles? So I was like, you've really got to unbox a story. I said, so what happened? What was the moment that you broke down? What was your rock bottom moment? And we were on a call, and we kind of like were peeling back these layers one at a time. And what started happening at first was she was like, I was anxious. And we were kind of getting into a lot of like blanket emotions. Or people will say, oh, when I was a kid, I got made fun of. And it's like, okay, but can you unbox that and tell me the story behind it, or a specific day, a specific moment where that happened? And so for Nicole, we really were able to chunk it down a bunch. So she was like, well, actually, there was one day where I hit rock bottom. And I actually kicked a hole in my door. And my husband came running into the room, and he looked at me and said, what are you doing? Like, whatever's happening in your business, this isn't you. I don't know who this is right now. And she said, and I was like, okay, well, damn, like, that's some good stuff. I'm like, what happened next? She's like, he hugged me. I'm like, no. What happened literally as soon as he said that? What happened to you? She said, I broke down in tears. And as she was sharing it, she started crying. She said, I broke down in tears and I collapsed to the floor, and he caught me and he grabbed me. And I just sobbed on him. And he said, we've got to figure out a better way for you to run this business, because this is not you. This is not healthy. This is not working. And so now she's able to take that story, and she shares it so beautifully. And you can tell that it still brings out some very present emotion in her. Like, you can see that she still sees and feels everything that she experienced in that moment, but not in a painful way, but in like this was a difficult moment. And so she shares that story. And I mean, we worked together, I think this was like October 2016 when we mapped out this story. And she's like, I still use this story all the time, and it still is able to help me create so much connection with my followers. So when you start to really chunk down, you'll have a couple of stories that you're able to use over and over and over again. And what I do is, for myself, I have like a couple of stories that are like my go-tos, depending on like what I'm launching or what emotion I want to evoke that day. And I have them all stored inside like a document, and I'll recycle them. I'll reuse them. I'll use them in emails. I'll use them on video. I'll use them in posts. So start thinking about what is your rock bottom moment? What is that thing that you want to share? Now, I'm not saying do not air out your dirty laundry if it's something that you haven't healed from, because you do not want people coming to you saying, oh girl, like, I hope you feel better. Like, if that's happening, that's ineffective storytelling. Now you're leaving people in the rock bottom ditch, and you're not helping them out, because now they're comforting you because you haven't healed from it. So you definitely want to make sure, if you're sharing story, it's something that you fully healed from, or something that you feel like something you're in control of. We don't want to be airing dirty laundry, and we're going to talk more about this later in the week. Okay? So that's number 2. Number 2 is create connection. Like, story is going to help you create deep connection with your followers. Build that know, like, and trust, right? Fastest way to do it. Okay, so the third reason why story is so powerful for selling on social media is you'll be able to teach instead of preach. Teach instead of preach. So especially with my health coach clients, they may come out of like a certification program, Institute of Integrative Nutrition or something, and they're like, I want to tell people like dairy is bad and like you shouldn't be eating dairy. And they feel like they're reading from a textbook on social media, and they're like, well, like these people aren't sciencey, like they don't really want to know like what carbohydrates are doing to their body. But the beautiful thing is, if you teach with story, it won't come off as preaching. Like truly, when you're able to communicate your message and educate your audience without feeling like you're reading from a textbook or standing on a soapbox, it's going to be delivered in and integrated for them in such a more powerful way. I mean, think about religious text. Like before we had the ability to write, we passed down stories generation to generation, and that's how information was kept alive. Because if it was just dry textbook information, people would probably forget it because they weren't encoding it. But because it evoked some emotion, they were able to increase their memory and recall. And so this is something you want to do with your followers as well, not just on social media, not just in your programs, but you want to also do this if you are creating trainings. Story is one of the most powerful ways to help people learn. So think about something right now in your business that you've maybe wanted to teach your audience, something that you've wanted to share, but you weren't sure how to package and deliver it. Is there some kind of story that you can use along with this, or is there some kind of even metaphor or example that you can use to help people understand how it works? Can you create some kind of picture for them? They might be a visual learner, they might be an auditory learner, and they might be a kinesthetic learner, and so you want to make sure that you're tickling all the different senses and all the different ways that people take in information. Like maybe, I know in school, I was a total visual learner, so the teachers who were like for whatever reason, I always end up in like the classes with the kinesthetic teachers or the auditory teachers who just wanted to, lecture, and they wouldn't write any notes. And I'm like, what am I going to be tested on? I don't understand. Like, I'm type A. I'm like, give me a system, give me a structure, and I'm good to go. I can execute. But they didn't have clear frameworks for what they were teaching. And then there was the kinesthetic teachers who were like, we're not going to read from the book today. We're just going to get up and we're going to experience it together. So get in teams. And I was like, this is so not me. Like, this is not how I learn best, right? But as you grow, you learn to adopt and take different things from different styles. So think about how you learn and then realize, okay, there may be some gaps in the way that you're teaching, and story may be the perfect way for you to tie all of those together. So when you are creating a story, I want you to ask yourself, what emotions are you trying to evoke? Like, what is it that you want your ideal buyer, your customer to feel, right? This is a really good tool that you can use for email especially. What message or point do you want to make? So what is the wisdom that you want to share? And when it comes to this, like instead of just taking a meme or some kind of quote picture and sharing something, you really want to ask, how can you include a story in this to make it more fun, more you? Because anybody can go and post a quote. Anybody can make a blanket statement about the law of attraction or manifestation or whatever. But if you tell your story, nobody's copying and pasting that. You are then standing out in a unique way. That's what's going to get people to not just enjoy your stuff when they see it on your newsfeed, but actually type in your name to go and check out your stuff on a daily basis. And if you can get to that level, that's golden. That is golden. So I want to give you a quick example of, how to take something that you might feel like you're preaching and turn it into something that you can teach. And I would say Mike Dooley, he talks about the law of attraction. He is one of my favorite people because he's so dang good at creating visual aids for everything that he explains. Like he's really just a ninja at story. So let's say you want to try to explain to somebody how the law of attraction works, the law of vibration, how we manifest things into our reality. You could say, well, you think about your desires, you will have an energetic vibration, and then you attract to you whatever you put out there. Now, for some people, they're like, what did you just say? And for some people, you might go, yeah, that's true. I agree with that. But nonetheless, it's still, you wouldn't be able to recall that or repeat that. But I'm going to use the Mike Dooley example. When he talks about manifesting your desires, he's like, think of it like a GPS. And I've used this before, so you may be familiar with this, but it's such a good one. He talks about a GPS, right? He says, when you want to get somewhere, you put it out into the universe, it's like saying, I live in New York and I want to get to LA. My GPS says LA. Now, true or false, there are an infinite number of ways to get in my car, get in a plane, get in a bus. I can walk there. I could take an truly an infinite number of routes in all different types of transportation. But as long as I know where I want to get, LA, does it really matter how long it takes, or does it really matter how I get there? No, as long as I get there, that's what I put in my GPS. So what a lot of people mistake is that they either don't set a clear intention for where they want to go, what they want their desire to be, or they only get from New York to, let's say they get to South Carolina and they're like, well, no LA in sight, I guess it didn't work. But when you're in the car and you're getting to a destination, you might be only a mile away. If you're a mile away, can you see it? Nope. Can you see it? No. How close do you have to be to that thing in order to see that it's there, right? So this is kind of the idea that you need to see it to believe it. That's what a lot of people say, but really you need to believe it to see it. So as long as you hold that vibration and trust that the universe is bringing you to your desired end result that you put inside that GPS, you already put it there, it's guaranteed you're getting there as long as you stay the course. There's no right or wrong way. There's no right or wrong way to get there. There's an infinite number of ways that you can get to your end result. So that's what he talks about. So right there, that may have helped you understand when people talk about the law of attraction, manifestation, and surrendering to the universe. So that's one quick story, one that I've loved that he shared, or not even a story, right? That's just kind of like a visual aid. That's just kind of taking it and creating a metaphor for what's actually happening, right? So when you are teaching, how can you start to pull some of those things into the content that you're sharing, right? So that's number 3, teach instead of preach. And I promise you, for those of you who are loving the content that you're learning from your certification programs or from your schooling or just from, listening to podcasts, take everything. What I always do is I write out all of the bullet points, right? So today, the 3 bullet points were you become memorable, you create connection, and you can teach instead of preach. If I got on and only talked about that, you'd probably be like, okay, yeah, those are good points. But I'm illustrating those points with all those different stories. So when I'm writing out like my live videos even, I pretty much always have 3 bullet points. And then I try to figure out, okay, what's a story or an example that I can use to illustrate this point so that it's not just me gabbing away about, what I think about a certain topic. I want to help people really understand it and integrate it into their DNA. Yeah? Okay, cool. So that is what I have for you today. So this was day 1 of the 5-day story challenge, teaching you how to use story to sell on social media without selling. So I already actually, before this video, as a reminder, I sent out the PDF for day 1 to everybody. So if you're on the list, you will have gotten it. And if you haven't signed up yet, definitely go to heyjencasey.com/story and you can grab your download, your free download. Why not, right? So I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Have an amazing day. Bye.